She said she had answered the door. She thought it was somebody coming for the party, maybe early. And he said, identified himself as a police officer, said, "I'd like to come in." It was New Year's Eve. They were having a New Year's Eve party.
Marilyn Redmond wasn't expecting a police officer at the party, but she welcomed him in.
There was cooking going on in the kitchen, everything set up for a party.
Time was turning from 1980 to 1981. Joe Brownlee didn't expect his year to end and begin there too.
I was at my house. I got a call that they wanted me to go to North Phoenix. We've got a very unusual, difficult homicide. We need you.
Joe Brownlee was a prosecuting attorney for Maricopa County. When he entered the house that night, Joe found himself among detectives and investigators inside the Redmond family home. Now, a gruesome crime scene.
Crimes occurred in the master bedroom. Patrick Redmond was bound and had a sock in his mouth, and his throat had been slit ear to ear. The 2 shots to the head killed him.
Pat was Marilyn's husband. Helen Phelps, Pat's mother-in-law, was also found restrained, arms tied behind her back, sock in her mouth, shot twice in the back of her head.
Both of those bodies were shot execution style.
There were 3 victims, though. Patrick Redmond's wife, Marilyn, was also shot. But something happened.
1 bullet left, and that bullet went in the back of the head of Marilyn Redmond and out her mouth. And she survived. It was clear it was a hit. It was an assassination.
But the why? Why was Pat Redmond targeted?
That took a while to figure out.
For all anybody knew, the Redmond family had no enemies. Pat and his wife Marilyn were well liked. Pat ran a printing business on the west side of town called Graphic Dimensions with his partner Ron Lukazik. Business was going well. Life was good. So why was the Redmond family taken down like this? And who were these 3 men who carried out the executions? Those answers were hidden nearly 1,800 miles away.
Sunday, I got a call in January, I believe, that they had 2 gang members that they thought were responsible for a triple murder that had happened just before Thanksgiving in Chicago.
Greg Owen was head of gang prosecutions for Cook County, Illinois. At the time, one particularly violent gang kept making headlines.
It was more than a gang, it was a murder-for-hire organization called the Royal Family.
With the help of a government informant, 3 alleged killers of the Thanksgiving murder were identified: Roger Lee Cochise Collins, William Bracey, Murray Hooper. That informant doesn't stop there.
He actually called me and said, "I have some more stuff to tell you about another murder."
Another murder that involves Murray Hooper and William Bracey, but not in Chicago.
He's telling me all about this murder in Phoenix, which I knew nothing about a murder on New Year's Eve and how he had picked them up at the airport. They were actually having an argument in the car, Bracey and Hooper.
While they're in the car, Bracey and Hooper find out they messed up, big time. Marilyn Redmond had survived.
"I can't believe you're so stupid. You only shot her 1 time. I said, I need more bullets. Why didn't you say something?" So I get on the phone, I call Maricopa County DA, and they get all freaked out. They go, "I think some of our people are there in Chicago right now." I go, "You're kidding me. I had no knowledge." All of a sudden, I meet Joe Brownlee.
Simultaneously unfolding in Phoenix, another informant had emerged. A woman had come forward to Phoenix authorities. She knew Murray Hooper and William Bracey. They were staying with her while running a drug ring. And she knew who the third person was in the Redmond house that night because his car was the getaway car.
The third killer was a gentleman who had been a police officer. That was Ed McCall.
At the Phoenix Police Department.
At the Phoenix Police Department.
At first, are you trying to figure out how these two people from Chicago and this former Phoenix cop even get together in the first place?
Of course.
And what'd you find?
Well, we found that there was a fellow locally that was Robert Cruz, went by Bobby Cruz.
Robert Cruz becomes the key connection to the 3 New Year's Eve hitmen with an unexpected tie.
What did Pat Redmond have to do with these 3 men?
Bobby Cruz had a contact in Las Vegas at one of the casinos. He was connected to organized crime in Chicago.
Something was in the works, but under wraps.
Pat Redmond was a problem.
What do you mean? A murder in Phoenix and some people involved and then somebody's related to the mafia? I didn't even know what he was talking about. It sounded far-fetched, but it wasn't far-fetched at all. It was right on.
Who better to explain how mafia connections could trickle down from New York to Chicago to Las Vegas to Phoenix?
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Than the former underboss of the Gambino family and one of the most prolific mafia hitmen to ever live.
My name is Salvatore Gravano, but I'm probably better known as Sammy the Bull. Money, connections, power, and greed. All of those things control everything, all the time. Throughout the time in the mafia, I was involved in 3 mafia wars. I was involved in 19 murders. I did 22 years of my life in prison. I became the underboss of the most powerful organized crime family in the country at that time. And I became a more or less a professional hitman.
Did you want to be that?
No. I just seemed to be good at it.
In the 70s and 80s, Salvatore Gravano was rising in the ranks of the mafia in the Gambino family. He was and is known around the world as Sammy the Bull and part of the inner workings of New York Mafia. Several decades earlier, another New York mobster found himself driving through a tiny desert town in Nevada, Bugsy Siegel.
Bugsy Siegel was on the lam. He went into a small town, and they were gambling. He saw the sheriff coming. He said, you're going to get arrested, you're gambling. And they told him, they passed a law that there it was legal, gambling was legal there. And that just woke him up, an idea.
Taking a gamble on you.
So began the rise of Las Vegas as we know it, when Bugsy Siegel built the first major casino resort, the Flamingo, followed by big casinos and resorts popping up left and right.
It was completely mob controlled. They built it. He was going out with a beautiful movie star, and she made arrangements to bring in people in theater and stuff, and they put on shows, and it exploded.
Was it easy to launder money through these casinos?
Oh yeah. They didn't even know what it was, so they were always skimming money right off the top. They really didn't know what the hell was going on, especially they were controlling everything.
Would power from the casino, the mafia, could they do other business dealings and launder money elsewhere? Was that a goal of theirs?
The mafia is like an octopus. We have tentacles. We go into everything. Unions, construction, garbage, bread, making clothes.
Everything, like, let's say, a printing business. the one in Phoenix, owned by Pat Redmond and Ron Lukasik. The two had been approached by Robert Cruz, who was not only affiliated with the Chicago Mafia, but was brokering mob deals in Vegas, attempting to become a certified gang member, a made man.
He made some connections with a casino that he would launder their money through a printing business. And that printing business was owned by Pat Redmond and Ron Lukasik. So Cruz approached them, the two owners, and Pat Redmond said, "No, I'm not going to sell. I like my business, no." Ron Lukasik apparently said, "I'd be open to listening to it." Pat Redmond was a problem.
Robert Cruz used his connections.
Robert Cruz made the call to Chicago to get the two killers, Billy Bracey and Murray Hooper, to come to Phoenix.
There was a reason Cruz wanted members of the royal family street gang to carry out the killings.
Because they felt if they used Afro-American offenders, they wouldn't be linked back to the mafia, which is who was really behind this, the mob in Chicago.
How much were they making off these
Well,
hits?
what I was told by this guy who was in the car, drove him, that he had received $50,000 as the remainder of their contract fee, which in 1980 was quite a bit of money.
What was the motive for McCall to go from a Phoenix police officer to now an assailant in this execution-style murder?
It was money. This was a paid hit, and it was all about money.
And who had money at the time? The mob.
We're in everything. You name it, and we spread all over the place. And we find ways. We're very creative people. Money, connections, power, and greed. All of those things control everything, all the time. All the time.
The bombshell moment that would change trials in 2 different states, the lone survivor herself.
And the judge says, "Mr. Brownlee, do you have any more witnesses?" I said, "Yes, one." We called Marilyn Redmond to the stand.
Whew. I mean, I get chills just thinking about it right now from all those years ago.
But just when you think you know this case,
We don't know who did the deed, but that was the end of Bobby Cruz.
you don't.
Joyce Lukasik is charged with ordering the 1980 execution-style slayings of Patrick Redmond and his mother-in-law, Helen Phelps. Prosecutors claim Lukasik ordered the murders because Redmond, who was a business partner of her husband, Ron Lukasik, turned down a business deal worth millions.
The door opens, in comes Mrs. Redmond. She's a small framed woman. She sworn in, she takes the stand, she tells what happens, and then I ask her, "Can you identify anybody in the courtroom that you've seen before that had something to do with the murder of your husband and your mother?" And she points right at Ed McCall and says, "He was the one that knocked on my door and I let him in because I thought he was a cop."
The Edward McCall and Robert Cruz trials in Phoenix come first. Both convicted in the Redmond murders and both sentenced to death.
What is your true name, sir?
Marilyn Redmond then heads to Chicago. She was going to testify in Murray Hooper and William Bracey's trials too.
You've been charged by indictment by the Maricopa County Grand Jury with count 1, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, class 1 felony.
I put her on the witness stand during the penalty phase, and it was probably the most traumatic moment I've ever had as a lawyer, and never had since putting her on the stand. She walked maybe 10 feet. She was within 7 feet from the table, and she pointed her finger at Bracey, and she goes, "He's right there." I mean, you could hear air. There wasn't a sound. It was frozen in time. I mean, I'll never forget it.
Another murder conviction and death row sentence for Hooper and Bracey. That could have been the end of this case. All involved sentenced to die. But the twists and turns had only just begun.
Joyce Lukasik is charged with ordering the 1980 execution-style slayings of Patrick Redmond and his mother-in-law, Helen Phelps. Prosecutors claim Lukasik ordered the murders because Redmond, who was a business partner of her husband, Ron Lukasik, turned down a business deal worth millions.
Even though Ron Lukasik was never charged for any involvement, a state witness told authorities Joyce Lukasik had family connections to Robert Cruz and was actually the mastermind behind the killings for financial gain.
The jury found her guilty.
Joyce is convicted in the slayings too, at first.
I don't think we ever went to sentencing. It was reversed or granted a new trial. Yeah. And then others tried her.
And then she was not convicted, right? Eventually?
Correct.
So first she was convicted, then she was not convicted. Just the same as Bobby Cruz.
Right.
The same as Bobby Cruz. You heard that right. The Arizona Supreme Court ruled Cruz was denied a fair trial and ordered a new trial. This time, the conviction, not guilty. But the wannabe made man paid a self-inflicted price for freedom.
So Bobby Cruz, who was unsuccessful in bringing the Chicago and Las Vegas Mafia to Arizona, that failed. But he was tried in Arizona at least twice, not convicted. So he's now free to run his mouth. And that's what he did. He kept talking about all his connections in Chicago, tried to huff and puff himself up to be a mafia-made guy. And then he disappeared. A few years later, there was a contractor in rural Cook County that decided to plow up some cornfields and put in a housing addition. And they plowed up Bobby Cruz's body. He had been restrained, tied up, shot in the back of his head, execution style, rolled up in a tarp and buried. And we don't know who did the deed, but that was the end of Bobby Cruz.
This entire case revolves around corruption that goes all the way up through the highest ranks of government. Murray Hooper and William Bracey were on death row in Chicago, but Joe Brownlee wanted to prosecute them to Arizona's death row too.
I get pushback.
Why?
Money. They've been convicted, they're on death row in Illinois. Why are you doing this? There's no reason to do it. Nothing can be gained by doing another trial.
Boy, was Joe Brownlee right. He just didn't know it yet.
Why did that become important, that they were sentenced to death in Arizona too?
Well, because in 2003, the governor of Illinois at the time was George Ryan. He was on the verge of being indicted for bribery, among other things. So on his way, 2 days before he left office, he commuted the death sentences of everybody in Illinois, including Collins, Bracey, and Hooper.
Because of all of these reasons today, I'm commuting the sentence of all death row inmates, 167 of them.
Just because he thought he would maybe get a jury pool would be more favorable to him when he went to trial, because he had done this magnanimous act. That's really what happened. And so nobody got the death penalty. He couldn't. It was all over. He let them all go. They got life, but not in Illinois.
So they are only on death row because you followed through with an Arizona conviction.
Yep, yes, that's exactly right.
Nearly slipping through the cracks, Murray Hooper and William Bracey were sent to death row in Arizona 40 years ago. Edward McCall and William Bracey have since died, which leaves one, the last hitman, Murray Hooper. Today, decades after some of the most heinous and brutal crimes in Arizona and Chicago, the Arizona Supreme Court ruling the last hitman will take his last breath on November 16th.
Is that kind of the last chapter of this novel of a case? Is that the final action that closes it?
I believe so.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
Yep. It's total closure then, because everybody else is gone.